And welcome to another episode of Preparing for the Unexpected. I'm your host, Alex Fullick, and as always, we like to talk about things related to disaster recovery, business continuity, emergency management, COVID-19, resilience, anything that's relatable to those topics. Speaking of topics, if there is something you want us to talk about or you'd like to be a guest on the show, please feel free. Go to the Voice America webpage for the show, voiceamerica.com, preparing for the unexpected. There is a button underneath the graphic that allows you to send the host an email. Me, I do respond to everything. So please feel free, send me a note. If you want to advertise a service or product, I can get you some information on that too. You can reach me the same way. Or if you're watching the video, you leave a comment and I can reach out to you that way. And I'd like to thank everybody at Stone Road for sponsoring today's episode and their product, boastassessment.com, that allows you to do a self-assessment on your program and align your resources appropriately. Now, for anyone who's listened to the show and for first-time viewers, because this is the very first radio show we're actually video recording. So my guest, in case you didn't know that, just so you're aware, James, you're the first one.
I like it. I like being the guinea pig. Thank you.
Many of you will know that I talked about the Continuity and Resilience Today conference I was speaking at in Toronto. That was early October. Calendar's up there. Yeah, early October. And as last year and the year before, we usually try and get some of those speakers on the show to talk about what they had to present at the conference. And today is one of those speakers, but it's actually a speaker who's familiar with the show because he's been here, I think, three times.
A couple times. Yeah.
So I'd like to welcome back to the show, who needs no introduction if you recognize the voice or you've seen him before. I'd like to welcome James Green. James, welcome.
Thank you so much. Yeah, the first time you and I spoke last year, we spoke about what turned out to be the relatively calm topic of climate change.
Yeah.
Right? And that was before 2020. So it's been you and I have had a heck of a ride this year, for sure, definitely.
Oh, who hasn't? I think everybody's had a heck of a ride.
Yep.
And just so everybody's aware, I'm actually, well, James knows too, that I'll be speaking with him, I think, 2 more times over the next 2 weeks, I think.
Yep.
So you're going to become a regular here.
Looking forward to it. I hope I pass the audition. Would love to be a regular contributor. Absolutely.
Oh, you're probably better at this than I am. So because people don't usually see me, so so we'll see where it goes. Now, your topic at CRT, it was what was it? Removing conquering the top 5 BCM roadblocks, right?
Yes, I had wanted to talk in person about the Stanley Cup champion Tampa Bay Lightning, but sadly, a little team here in Tampa, your Stanley Cup champions, Tampa Bay Lightning.
What's that? Toronto Maple Leafs? What?
Exactly. I was all excited to be decked out in Lightning paraphernalia in Toronto. I thought that would go over really well. But alas, instead, virtually at Continuity and Resilience Today, we talked about the top 5 BCM roadblocks. And before everyone cringes, please don't stop listening. Please don't turn off the video. I know a lot of times when you see a topic about top 5, this, that, or the other, is it just a listicle? Is it just my sneaky way to talk about how I work for a vendor? And no. Right? So I wanted to actually do something meaningful on this topic, but as you know, these types of titles tend to draw attention, tend to get accepted into conferences. So yeah, let's dig in and let's talk about maybe a non-traditional top 5 roadblocks. We're not going to talk about how to do our BIAs or our plans. Those aren't really what we see as roadblocks to our programs.
Well, like you just said, BIA, we're not going to talk about it, but they come with their own roadblocks anyway.
Correct. Absolutely, right? They do. Yep.
and testing and all the other different components of a program. So, well,
Yes.
let's jump straight into it, because I've got your presentation open here, and the first one is um, it seems to be a play on getting buy-in, but I like the way you've kind of got it written here, getting management's attention, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I take this one to heart. As I said, I am based in Tampa, Florida, right? And when you are a Florida-based business continuity practitioner, you tend to not get management's attention 360 days a year. The 5 days a year you can get management's attention are when a hurricane is in the Gulf of Mexico or in the Atlantic Ocean. And funny enough, we were impacted by a hurricane 2 days ago, right? Hurricane Ada, the the
Yeah.
29th named storm, I think, in the Atlantic, a new
Wow.
record, because we want to have more interesting things happen in 2020. So prior to this year, yeah, one of those biggest roadblocks was, hey, how do I get management's attention? And as you know, for better or for worse, right now, if you can't get management's attention during a global pandemic, right, during widespread civil unrest, during a hurricane, during wildfires, during, pick your doomsday scenario, I think you're doing something wrong. So a lot of times when I work with companies, it's that first step of, hey, how do you get management's attention? And that has not been the case this year, right? You have a spotlight on you, like I seem to right now, whether you want it or not. Like, I think we are all, as professionals, under the microscope, good and bad, in a way we never have
Mhm.
been. So I think we're, like I said, the one good thing coming out of 2020, if you were one of those people who's like, hey, how do I get management's attention? How do I get management to understand that my continuity and resilience program is important? I don't think you have to have those conversations anymore.
Well, actually, that's interesting, because I know you've written about this too, and I think that we're probably going to be touching on something we might be talking about later on. Is on LinkedIn, there's been a lot of people saying in the industry that their role in business continuity is, um, shall we say, not as required as it used to be. And is that because maybe the COVID pandemic didn't really start off as kind of a big disaster? It kind of crept up on us a little bit, with HR being involved and emergency management being involved. And, there were no facility fires, there were no technology failures and things like that.
Yeah, so you want to go right to the controversial subject.
Well, that's the one
Yeah.
we're going to talk about later, right?
Yes,
Yeah,
let's
yeah,
let's
okay.
talk about the most. I've never gotten hate mail in this profession, but I did get it when we get to topic 3. But yeah, there's certainly been, I think, a lot of discussion in our industry about what happened, who led response, right? Were we a part of that or not? It's been a very big topic, and as I found out, a very controversial
Mhm.
topic. But it's certainly relevant to what
Now,
we're doing today.
and to everyone who's listening and watching, we are actually going to be recording a different show on that subject. So I'm just going to leave that comment there, because we're going to
Yep.
dig a lot deeper in a future show. Now, with getting management's attention, why is it that something has to happen before we get their attention?
Wow, I think that's a societal question. Why is it that we don't eat healthier? Why is it that we don't work out and stretch and exercise the way we should, or we don't save for our retirement or the way we should? I think it's just kind of human nature. Um, you know, I would think one of the biggest struggles I've seen working with organizations prior to this year is if they had never experienced any type of BCDR cyber crisis incident, and we're like, hey, here's why you want to build resilience into your operations. And it wasn't a sales pitch. It was just, I believe, you believe, these things are important, right? And for those companies, I had one company last year say, look, James, this seems, everything you say seems really well thought out. We've been in business 100 years. and nothing's ever happened here. So why would we devote time and energy and resources into continuity, into resilience? What's the ROI? So a lot of organizations that have been fortunate to always operate under blue sky just maybe couldn't wrap their head around something will happen. Something
Right.
always happens. And now this year, I do not know, and if your listeners know, I'd love for them to share with you. I do not know an organization that hasn't been impacted in some way this year. And so now management understands, oh, now a lot of companies have come to us who maybe didn't want to, patted us on the head last year, right? Or like, oh, now we're in trouble, or
Yeah.
now I had to disperse my workforce for the first time ever, or I'm classified as essential, or I'm retail. How do I, now they get it, right? Because we've gone from theoretical to an actual. So yeah, I would love to hear if there's somebody who hasn't been impacted at all, positively or negatively, send in some email,
Yeah.
comment. I'd love to, because I haven't found one, and that's not out of arrogance. That's just like, hey, I want to know if there's someone who's like, no, 2020 is the same as 2019. What are you talking about?
Yeah.
So
I'd have a difficult time believing anyone who said they weren't impacted, because
exactly.
even if they had a remote workforce in existence already, they would still be impacted from suppliers and other people they would be dealing with. That somewhere, somehow, they would have to have felt something.
Correct.
You know, well, once you've got their attention, how do you keep it?
Yeah, and that
Because
is
fires go out, you rebuild buildings, COVID, hopefully, fingers crossed, will eventually be taken care of and go away, even though it's looks like it's not going to be for a while, but hopefully at some point it will. So how do you keep their attention so that, well, we dealt with it, so now we know what to do, and they just walk away again?
exactly. And that is, now that we have that attention, how do we keep it, is so vital. So off screen, I'm looking at a word art that I had sent you as well, that you're probably looking at, right? And we did a webinar a couple of months ago, and as people were logging in, we just asked them a question. What is one word you would use to describe your experience with responding to COVID-19? And we created a word art out of the responses. And so the more people use the same response, it grows. You see those words bigger. Right in the middle: challenge, unprecedented, resilient,
Hmm.
stressed, all the words you would think of seeing. But there's a lot of words I don't see there. I don't see any positive words. I don't see opportunity, right? I don't see
Hmm.
improvement. Um, and the word opportunity really struck me, because I think a big roadblock to keeping management's attention is quite often people see business continuity as a project, right? We're going to have a start date, we're going to have a kickoff, we're going to do our risk assessments, BIAs, and plans. We have an end date, and then we're permanently resilient. And
Right.
a lot of companies that I work with, they're like, yeah, we had somebody come in a couple of years ago and do all of this for us, but that's not business continuity. Business continuity isn't linear,
Hmm.
right? To me, business continuity is a cycle. And successful business continuity is not a project, it's a program. And I can tell,
Is it a project? Is it a project the first time you go through it before it becomes?
yeah,
I don't. I hesitate to use business as usual, but
no,
most projects, when you implement something, becomes business as usual. So I'll use that analogy. So it's the first time you go through it, a project, then it graduates to a full mature program, hopefully.
yeah. And I think that's really where companies struggle, is they assign a project manager, they assign resources, they do that first 12 months. Let's say they do everything, right? They do risk assessments, they do BIAs, they do SOPs, they do plans, they do tests, they do exercise, they do the whole wheel. And then it's really hard culturally for companies to say, now we got to do it again. Now we got to expand Maybe we just started with things that are at the top level. Now we got to go deeper. We got to go wider. We got to go deeper. We got to go wider. And I think right now we have that opportunity as professionals to talk to management. It's right now, you and I are recording this, it's November. A lot of companies in Asia, this is month 11 for them. In the US and Canada, this is month 8. And when do you think it's going to end? Next summer, next spring? You've got a 14, 16, 18-month business continuity event. It's a great reason to show people why a project needs to be a program. You have that attention. Let's keep it by keeping management involved. And I think that's the other dangerous thing about project management. You're the executive sponsor, right? And you tell me, here's the money, I cut the check, here's your resources for the project, and then I'm done. Right. But that's really dangerous, because me as the BC guy, the business continuity manager, I can't own risk, right? I need management to own risk. It's my job to present. I feel it's my job to present to management, here's what's going on here, and here's recommendations that I'm proposing. But I really think management needs to decide, okay, we as a company are now going to mitigate this risk, transfer this risk, or ignore this risk. But I think a lot of times business continuity managers feel they own risk. But without resources, how can you successfully own anything? Right? Yeah. If you're an independent individual contributor, independent contributor, how do you own risk for a huge organization? So one way I really am a fan of keeping management's attention, keep them involved.
James, just before we went away after the first segment, we've got, you made some great points there about, management owning risk. How do we keep them involved going forward so that they understand that and they don't do, and you did it perfectly by just, doing the Pontius Pilate thing there, thinking that someone else is now going to take that risk and manage everything going forward. How do you keep them on board so that they understand that, no, that isn't the way it has to be? You have to be involved ongoing throughout this.
So I am a big proponent of executive management as the business continuity steering committee. And the reason I'm a proponent of that is I've been a business continuity practitioner myself. I have been an individual contributor or small team leader myself, and it's been successful for me. So I have found by having your management as your steering committee, you keep them involved. Now, that being said, there's a lot of pitfalls with steering committees. I see these go wrong all the time. I sat in on one yesterday that was a train wreck. So it's not a easy button, management's the steering committee, boom, management owns risk, right? You have to, as the business continuity practitioner, manage the steering committee itself, right? And so that takes a lot of time and effort. And I'm happy to share with you a few common mistakes that I see over and over and over again, if you'd like.
Well, sure. Why not take the time to do that? I'll share. I've worked with executives on steering committees as well, and all but one reported to the C-suite.
Okay.
And it certainly made it a lot easier for decision making, and getting things done and assigning resources when it was all the top people. And the nice thing is this place had put ensuring business, I can't remember their exact wording, but putting business continuity and the continuance of operations as part of their performance. So
wow. Nice.
They were all had buy-in and contributed, and came up with ideas on their own, and we met every month. And when, got at some point we went bi-monthly, but that made a difference.
Absolutely. That's so important. And, you touched on something earlier. The very first thing I see go wrong is, does the steering committee have decision-making authority
Mm,
day to day, right? So if you and I present a risk to a company and we say it's going to cost $5,000 to mitigate this risk, and the group says, well, we don't have authority to do that, then you've got the wrong people in the room,
yeah.
right? If we really want that steering committee as management to own risk, they have to be able to do something about it, right? They have to have some approval authority, or day to day, they have to be people who make decisions. So that's the first thing I see that is a big problem. The second thing is, and you can ask any of my former employers this, because this is something you heard the term, are you going to die on this hill? And the second thing is a hill that I will die on. So we form our steering committee. Let's say you're the COO, I'm the CFO, and you say, nah, I want to send a delegate, right? And so what happens is I see that you sent a delegate. So then the next meeting, I send a delegate. So then the next meeting, everyone sends a delegate. And now you're back to non-decision makers. So I get really cranky about people wanting to send delegates. I'll reschedule the meeting. Like, you have to be there. Decision makers have to be there. And this is why you get a room full of non-decision makers. So that is a hill I will die on. I have died on that hill myself with clients. So it's not just me speaking academically. I got a room full of people who can't even order lunch, and they're making risk decisions. It's not going to work.
I would die on that hill with you, because I've been in status meetings for large programs and projects where we need decisions on major changes to scope and schedule and finance, and and
Exactly.
procedures and all that, and the decision maker doesn't show up or sends a delegate who can't make it. Well, we'll get back to you on that. It's like, well, we can't. We need that decision now. That's
Exactly.
why we're bringing it to you now. That's why we gave you the heads up for the last 2 weeks that this was coming, that this was the point to make the decision. So if they're not here, they've now impacted us.
Yep. And that kind of leads to my next thing. So why do executives send delegates in the first place? When meetings are boring or when they're a waste of time? So the steering committee meeting I sat in on yesterday for an organization was frankly a waste of time. If you're going to spend 35 minutes showing which plans are completed, which BIAs are updated, executives don't understand what that means in terms of how does this impact the business.
Mm-hmm.
Right? You should be giving that kind of technical information to a steering committee, but maybe as a pre-read. If I have time with my executive team, I want them to be making strategic decisions only, right? And I think what happens with so many of us is because we spend all of our time or a lot of our time doing risk assessments and BIAs and plans, that's what we want to talk about. But this executive team yesterday, you could clearly tell that is not what they wanted to talk about. Spending all the time saying we have 99% of our plans completed, but there's one plan in this one division that we can't get a response. Is that something your executive team should be discussing? I would argue no. And I would argue it's that kind of thing when an executive sees, I don't need to be in this meeting. Right?
Yeah.
So we really need to make sure those steering committee meetings are strategic. And more importantly, everything we're talking about, how does this affect the business? Meaning, why should I, as the COO, care? Right? We got to always tie back the risk to not just the risk itself, the risk for the sake of risk, but what is the risk that actually impacts the business? Right? We need to talk about, hey, we're not getting traction in our vendor risk management program. 70% of our revenue comes through this one third-party supplier. Now I, as a non-BC person, understand, wow, I don't want to lose 70% of our revenue. That's a big problem.
Yeah.
So we've got to keep it at the strategic level, and we've got to always tie back to how does this impact the business? And like I said, sometimes I think we're just measuring risk for the sake of risk. Here's the percentage of BIAs updated in the last 6 months. Those are all important metrics. I'm not saying they're not. But what I am saying is if you only have 30, 45 minutes with a C-suite, you better keep their attention or you won't see them in the next meeting.
Yeah, if you're lucky. I know I've
Yeah.
had mostly 15, 20 minutes, throughout my history. That's the most you can get. You mentioned, you brought up an interesting point here. Some of the things that we're always saying, we've got 99 out of 100 BCPs done as an example, and did all these BIAs. Are we doing that subconsciously because we're always fighting for executive buy-in? And we've been trained that to do and have all this stuff is the way to an older way of showing value. Look how much we've done. So we communicate this way to executives to show, look at what we've done, look how valuable we are. Have we kind of set ourselves up in that way?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that segues right into the third roadblock of relevance.
Back to that again.
Let's get back to my hate mail. But no, but it's a valid question. Are we relevant to the business? And every business unit has to answer that question. And risk management historically has not. But then I think that's how you get marginalized. And it's not just business continuity, right? I think certainly COVID-19 has brought this to the forefront. And I'll touch on that in a second, but I'm thinking about the International Institute of Auditors recently revised their 3 lines of defense, right? Your classic 3 lines of defense: management, risk, audit. And they even realized audit was meant to be separate, but it's become isolated, which means it's not relevant. And I think we've seen that in a lot of risk management. And like you said, we're trying to fight for respect. We're trying to show value. And maybe historically we've shown that value by the exercises we've done, the failover test, the risk assessments, the BIAs, the plans. But what happened this year? Which company used that mechanism? I have a client who last year they were getting ready for ISO certification in BC, and their pre-audit they passed with flying colors, right? And they've passed all their regulatory audits, and they've always passed internal and external audits, and they're feeling very confident about their risk management program. And their CEO told me, hey, you know what? In March, we threw it all in the trash. It's not actionable. It didn't meet the needs of the business. And to me, that is how you show relevance. No matter what you do, what's the return on investment for the business? How are you relevant? Whether you're the environmental health and safety manager, the business continuity manager, the payroll manager, pick a function. Are you relevant to the business? This has been most organizations' time of need. And I don't think we answered the bell as well as we should have. And you and I are going to take a massive deep dive into this in a next episode, and I'll have to go into witness protection because I did. I'm very passionate about this. I spoke out about it, how I felt things were going, and I got a ton of hate mail. And as a business continuity guy, I was like, I've never even gotten fan mail, let alone hate mail. So this is kind of fun. But it turned out to be a very controversial subject, and it's not meant to be, see, I told you so. I'm a BC professional too. It hurt me to see so many people in our profession get downsized, get laid off. And that's really what got me thinking. I'm like, well, the fire department doesn't lay off people when there's a 5-alarm fire. How are we seeing so many people get marginalized, get downsized, get made redundant, get pushed aside in our profession during a business continuity incident. That hurt me personally. So I spent some time thinking about that, and it came back to this topic of relevance. Are we relevant? And I'm not talking about, before I get more hate mail, right? If you look at the United States Airlines, their business was down 90%. I know a lot of people at Delta and American and United who lost their jobs. When your revenue goes down 90%, you have to make cuts, right? My household income went down 90%. Some things have to change. So I'm not talking about airlines, cruise lines, hotels, industries that were catastrophically impacted. But what I'm talking about is companies who got clipped 10, 15% income or revenue. Why weren't they hiring more? Like, do you know any organizations that in a down economy were expanding their risk management, their business continuity departments? I know two. And I think we're not showing relevance in the way that we need to.
I think so too. I know personally, I can, I'm pretty honest here. I've run into the trap of, especially, in earlier days, look how many plans we've done, look how many things we've done. I've done
Me
that.
too.
And I've fallen into the trap too of addressing audit, rather than the corporate need.
Well, because that's often how our jobs get created.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I get brought into clients quite often because they're like, we failed the BC audit. I got brought into my last company because they failed the BC audit and the board said you will remediate these audit issues by the end of the year. So that's certainly, I'm not saying we should just ignore audit. But to your point, that's the starting point. That also can't be the end point.
Yeah.
Just passing audit is check the box mentality. And maybe for some companies that's good enough, but then that explains why during an incident they're like, well,
they're floundering.
So we don't need you.
James, let's move on, because I know our next show is going to be really interesting, because it seems like we both really just want to jump in on that.
Yes, I'm glad we're doing. Thank you for giving me a whole show to really get in trouble with that one.
Yeah, and everyone who's listening and watching, it's one you don't want to miss, because there's a lot of really good things to talk about on it. Our BCM relevance, and our roles. So let's move to another roadblock in your article in our last segment. We've got 16 minutes, or just shy of, I guess.
Okay.
I think the next one is continuity or resilience.
Yes, my second most controversial topic. I know
I'm going to get all the hate mail here.
Just said it. I'm on Twitter and LinkedIn, James Green. Leave him alone. Yeah, so really quick, you and I were at BCI World last week. Brian Zawada and John Ezrine were talking about continuity or resilience. The chat box was melting down with angry commentary. I was like, wow, this is like a TV show. I've never seen this. But I am a proponent of this resilience. It's not a marketing thing. It's not a buzzword. I'm not trying to sell you something, but I think it ties in a lot of the things that you and I have talked about over this show, right? What's the delineation? For me, resilience is strategic, not just tactical. So a lot of those challenges and failures that we've talked about and we've seen this year, they weren't strategic. I don't know a company that said, we made bad strategic BC decisions. I think they made bad tactical ones. For me, resilience, where we get hung up on continuity, we tend to mitigate the last known risk, right? I guarantee everyone will have the most beautiful pandemic response plans for the next 18 months. Whenever we get hit by a hurricane here, these hurricane response plans are the most amazing orchestration plans I've ever seen. But the problem is, by looking backwards, we're guaranteed to stumble for the next unknown. And I'm not saying that companies should have masterfully managed a global pandemic. That's ridiculous. But when we're always looking backwards, that next bump in the night happens, we stumble. And for me, resilience is looking forward. We know there's going to be a bump in the night. We don't know exactly what it is, but we have the capability that the first 30% of our response is good regardless of the topic. So for me, resilience much more forward looking. And then resilience needs to be integrated, right? You talk about integrated risk management versus GRC. We'll start another war. But really what I'm finding talking to companies and those C-levels, and the reason they send delegates, they're like, look, I'm on the enterprise risk management committee, the vendor risk management committee, the business continuity steering committee, the crisis management team, the cybersecurity incident response team. I can't do all of that. I don't have bandwidth as an executive, even if I'm an executive who's invested in this process and risk management. Asking an executive to sit on 5 committees 4 times a year, not going to happen. And COVID again really got me thinking about this integrated strategy, because if you look at COVID-19 across the year, a lot of companies, this started as a supply chain issue in Wuhan, in China, in northern Italy, became a vendor risk management issue, became a pandemic for all of us, became business continuity as 60% of the world was working from home. It's now, for a lot of companies, a data privacy and cybersecurity issue. You're seeing malware and ransomware and phishing through the roof right now. And for a lot of companies who are returning to work or who have been essential, it's an environmental health and safety issue. So how do you manage through 6 different types of risk management? For me, resilience has really got to be integrated, a more holistic enterprise level approach.
Any suggestions on how to go about doing that? Let's say I was somebody who, an executive who is expected to be on all these different committees, and I want to embed resilience into my organization. How can I go about, some initial steps to get towards that?
I think a lot of companies have, duplication of efforts, and they should first focus on enterprise response. So knowing the tactical response to malware versus the tactical response to a shooter versus the tactical response to a building fire are all completely different. The strategic response should have a lot of similarities. Crisis communications should be the same apparatus, right? Your decision makers should be all similar. Why do we have, the marketing team responds to malware, but HR responds to a fire, but we use a PR firm for a tornado? Like, just looking at crisis communications, that's very convoluted. It should be the same. Crisis communications should be crisis communications, should be crisis communications regardless of the crisis. So for a lot of companies, to me, that's the first way they can easily start to become more resilient, to have an enterprise look, is that communication piece should be the same machine, I think.
Is that because some organizations, and I still know people who do this, think along the lines of scenario-based planning, where they come up with 1,000 different scenarios and they've got a different approach and different team for every single scenario.
Yeah, it doesn't scale. And that's a great way to get your management to check out, because they can't be on top of 20 scenarios. And then the biggest problem is, what happens when you have a pandemic? What happens when you have something you haven't had before? Where's the scenario? That's why I'm kind of an all hazards guy, because just like you, when I started, I was plan specific, scenario specific. And then my company had a large site in Cairo, Egypt, and the government collapsed. I didn't have a binder for government collapse. And so it got me thinking about, okay, there's got to be a more effective way to manage through the unknown. And certainly just what we've seen, it just seems there's more and more unknown.
Well, we're already halfway through our last segment, so let's get to number 5, roadblock.
All right, really quick. So, personal resilience. So, let's just jump right in and throw it on the table. Let's talk about mental health. Let's talk about the mental health of us as professionals. You've managed through incidents. I've managed through incidents. Your viewers and listeners have managed through incidents. They're days, maybe a week. Maybe you have an outlier. Maybe you help respond to Katrina. It was months. But we're used to, during that time, we're spun up. It's 24/7. You're overwhelmed. Everybody wants everything right now, but then it ends. And so what we're seeing now, like we've talked about, this isn't ending. And I'm seeing people burn out in levels they never have before. You're seeing people not take vacation time. You're seeing people on their phone 24/7, work, home, like now I'm in work, now I'm at home, now I'm at work. And it's leading to burnout. And what happens with burnout, our mental health suffers. We make mistakes. Our morale goes down. Our physical health goes down. So the 5th roadblock for me right now this year is how are we personally resilient? Check in on a colleague. If your company has an EAP and you need to talk to someone, use it. If your company doesn't have an EAP, there's a lot of organizations like the Red Cross and all these other organizations that have crisis response counselors, right, that are willing to talk. I'm taking some time off in December, even though I'm not going anywhere. I was like, I haven't unplugged all year. So I'm going to unplug from work. And I think it's a thing we neglect during an incident. And we can, because, okay, back to a few days, we're back to normal. But I'm starting to see people burn out. And, a lot of people think January 1, the clock's going to turn and everything's back to normal. But the world is showing us, Australia just came out of a second lockdown. Parts of Europe are going into second lockdown. The numbers in the United States, everything is indicating that the world is not going to care if it's December or January. And so I really think we need to take some time and focus on our mental health, our emotional health, make sure we're more personally resilient, because we have another long push ahead of us.
We do, most definitely. And I think part of that is really going to put even greater stress on frontline workers and, people that, even truck drivers. I know people sometimes forget that, they're the ones bringing the produce. They're the ones bringing all the stuff to the grocery stores, and our grocery store workers, it's tough for them because they're working under different, they don't get the luxury of working from home. Let's put it that way.
Correct. Exactly.
They're right in the face of a situation they can't see, a disaster they can't see, but could be right in front of them. So their nerves and their well-being is going to be impacted because they're going to be taking that home too.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, the person at home, a husband, a wife, a boyfriend, whatever the case may be, could be sitting there stressed as well. Because they don't get to interact with anybody. There's no water cooler time anymore.
We're certainly seeing
balance seems to have started to disappear for everybody.
Yeah, and for a lot of people, you're seeing social distancing become social isolation. And for those in your audience who are in the Northern Hemisphere, as we head into winter, right, that's traditionally a time of difficulty for a lot of people in the best of scenarios. And now we're going to head into that where people are already frazzled, like you said, where you're already carrying that stress and that burden. And now we're going to a time of the year where there's not as much sunlight, except for me today, apparently. And it's colder and darker. And then that just kind of affects us as a cycle generally.
Well, that's got me thinking of what will happen in February, because February, they say, is the one time of year where people are just affected naturally. because of
Yes,
gray skies and cold weather, or winter, no leaves on the trees, that kind of thing. And if we will still be, I won't say if we will still be feeling the impacts of COVID. I'm a little worried for quite a few people when that time frame gets here.
exactly. Absolutely.
Believe it or not, we only have 3 minutes left. Would you believe? See, talking with you, it just goes by so fast.
I
But
don't believe it.
I don't
So
even know if we touched everything we were going to talk about, but
that's okay.
so do you have, we'll take 2 minutes. Do you have any final thoughts on roadblocks?
So you and I have spent 45 minutes talking about roadblocks, and they're all viewed as negatives, right? But I think identifying those roadblocks, identifying what those challenges are, you are able to identify what the opportunities are. I think coming out of 2020 as a profession, we have more opportunity than we ever had before. You've got management's attention. We're seeing companies throw resources at continuity and risk in ways they never have before. Um, with a lot of people being displaced, there's a lot of amazing people right now looking for a new home where traditionally you could not afford to get someone, or they weren't willing to leave where they were.
Mm-hmm.
There's a huge disruption in our profession right now, which means there are so many amazing people um, that are looking for work. You have companies now more willing to hire remote workers than ever before. So maybe, you're in Vancouver and I'm in Toronto, so I wouldn't hire you, but now do you have a camera? Who
Yeah,
cares?
yeah, that's
So
true.
I
Yeah.
think it's creating a ton of opportunity for us as a profession, of keeping management's attention, of a talent pool as wide and deep as I've ever seen, and being more mindful now of what is it that management's looking for. I think we really have an opportunity to drive the narrative of our profession in maybe a way we haven't had in quite a long time.
We have that opportunity to really develop our value and show our value, rethink the way we're doing it.
Exactly.
Like if industries didn't rethink the way they did things, we'd all be driving Ford Model Ts, right?
Yeah. Some days I might not be a bad thing. Just give me a horse. I'll just take a horse.
Well, we've come to the end. Again, James, it's always a pleasure to talk to you, and I'm looking forward to our next couple of chats, especially our third roadblock, which we hinted at. We tried to stay away from, but it was kind of difficult. But I'm looking forward to that chat. So thanks again for sharing your expertise and time, and I look forward to chatting with you once again.
Thank you so much.
And to everybody else listening and watching, stay prepared, everybody. If you liked that video, thumbs up. If you didn't like that video, thumbs down. But leave a message and let me know what your thoughts are. If you'd like to be a guest on the show to talk about something related to business continuity, disaster management, COVID, personal well-being, anything that's relatable to those subjects, you can reach me through my LinkedIn profile, which is in the video description. And of course, don't forget to subscribe. In the meantime, stay prepared, everybody.